You have time mail.
Am I normal typically? Here's my formal inquiry. If you tell me no, I'll cry. But I don't want you to lie. So here's my formal inquiry. Am I normal typically?
Hey, Noodlehead.
Hey, also Noodlehead.
Is something wrong?
I'm afraid I'm gonna be tired in the morning.
What?
I mean, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but that last video was a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're right, but we're only just getting started.
Yikes!
Wait, before we get too anxious about it, remember, it's gonna get uncomfortable, but you are safe here.
Okay, well thanks, but
But what?
I feel like I already forgot so much of what was in that last video.
That's okay. You can rewatch that video as many times as you want, but you also don't need to rewatch that one before watching this one. I'll walk you through everything you need to know.
Oh, whew.
That video was just my first attempt to try to help put out some of the destructive fires that had already started burning in your head at like a really young age. The sooner you realize that there's nothing wrong with you, the better.
Well, that's all well and good, and thank you, but let's get to my question. If nothing's wrong with me, does that mean I'm normal?
Yes and no. Okay, I mean, that's fair. What do you mean when you say normal?
You know what I mean. Normal, the way an average person is supposed to be.
Well, are you striving for average?
What do you mean?
Well, if your report card came back with a bunch of average grades, would you be happy?
No way.
Why not?
Because I'm worried that people only like me for the things I'm good at. And if I didn't get good grades, it might mean that my brain isn't special. Although, I guess special is a tricky word too.
What does it mean to you that your brain is special?
Sometimes it feels like there's magic in there. Like my brain is lighting up with magic. And sometimes extraordinary things come out of my brain that make other people light up too.
Ah, okay. And if you got an ordinary grade in something, it might mean you're not extraordinary.
Exactly.
Okay, so you think that people who get average or less than extraordinary grades aren't special?
No, that's not fair at all. You can't tell everything that's going on in someone's brain based only on what other people say about it. Oh.
Yep. You know how easy it is for other people to misconstrue your words, to misread your facial expressions, to misunderstand, and to thus discount your whole lived experience. You learned that unusually young.
Uh-oh. Unusual doesn't sound normal.
Normal is tricky.
Oh man, I knew it. Another tricky answer.
I know, it's frustrating, but people really do use normal in different and kind of contradictory ways. Are you normal as in you're like the kids around you? No, not really, but none of the kids these days really act the way the adults around them think they should act, so maybe don't put a lot of stock in that.
Okay.
But if you mean statistically normal, then yes.
Finally, some good news!
Sort of, kind of, not really.
Dagnabbit!
I'm sorry, I know that doesn't really answer your question at all, so let's bring out the bag and see what we're working with today. Okay, ask the bag your question.
Hey bag, am I normal?
Ah, shoot. I guess I set myself up for this one. The DSM-4, which is very flawed, but we will get there in the next video.
Well, what's so wrong with that book? Wasn't it right about dyspraxia?
Well, it was correct to notice that differences in coordination do exist among individuals, but it treats everything like a problem that needs to be fixed.
Well, isn't clumsiness a problem?
I assume it's less convenient than not stumbling over things? I wouldn't really know. But it's not something you can cure. I mean, you can practice and get more adept at movement, but spatial awareness is naturally tricky for you. For us.
Oh, I thought maybe if I knew what was wrong. I mean, sorry, not wrong, but like if I knew what to fix? Oh, I guess that still sounds bad.
Ugh.
What's wrong?
This very influential book is full of harmful ideas and bad science.
Are we gonna go through that whole book?
No, luckily I don't have to be the one to debunk this hot garbage. Plenty of other folks have cohesively cataloged the many faults of the bell curve.
Wait a minute, some of those videos are pretty recent.
Yeah?
So if it's been debunked so much, why is this book still relevant in 2020 whatever time you're in?
Because it made what sure looked like a Nazi salute at Trump's inauguration.
What?
I forgot. I'm not supposed to talk about current events. The technology we use to connect uses some really janky guardrails to supposedly stop time and space from ripping to shreds, but mostly what it does is just like censor hot button topics. Let me try this again. The US inaugurated a new president.
Okay.
During that ceremony, a very rich and powerful man made a raised arm gesture twice that actual fans of the Third Reich were excited to see.
Wait. What year are you in? I thought you were me in the future.
Yeah, I know.
I thought America defeated them like 50 years ago.
Yes, the regime in 1940s Germany was defeated, though not just by America. But contrary to popular liberal thought, that ideology is not only, still around, it seems to be thriving in 2025.
How? I don't understand.
You will understand soon enough, all too well.
Am I also gonna eventually understand what this has to do with me personally? I mean, obviously you know I care about this because it sounds genuinely awful, but what does all of this have to do with what we're talking about with my brain?
Well, you've wondered and worried for years whether or not you're normal. So let's talk about what normal actually means to you and to the world around you.
And also to Nazis? Really?
It's unfortunately incredibly relevant.
Oh, yikes. We better get started. Let's begin now.
Hey Nikki Doodlehead, welcome back to the video essay. Today we're going to talk about normal, when that concept does more harm than good, and what might be possible beyond the norms that you were presented with. So first, I have to ask you a question. Part 1, what's so great about normal? As we've encountered, normal can mean many different things all at once, so let's be clear about what normal means to you. As an anxious child, I think that normal primarily means fitting in. It means not attracting unwanted attention and therefore criticism to yourself. I think you assume that if you can just be normal, that will be the key to getting people to like you. So how have you learned that you should fit in? Understanding. One way to demonstrate that you fit in is by understanding what's being expressed around you, verbally, non-verbally, and otherwise, and by intuiting how to correctly respond to those cues. For a lot of people, this can look like confidently carrying on in conversation, knowing you are in on the joke as opposed to being the butt of the joke. Being able. And if you can't understand, one of the other best ways to seamlessly fit into the world around you is to be able to do things. As long as you can be useful, you can fit into any norm, right? You've seen plenty of evidence for this idea. Getting good grades makes people smile with you, and being bad at sports makes people laugh at you. Here's the thing. I can't guarantee that you'll fit in anywhere you go, but I can definitely guarantee that you won't fit in everywhere. That's why it's important for you to understand that the definition of normal that you learned as a survival tactic will not serve you in the long run. First, let's talk about understanding. See, understanding what's going on in a situation does not mean that you'll fit in. In some ways, the more you learn, the less you'll fit in. This doesn't seem to be true for everyone, but it is true for people like you. The more you understand about the world around you, the more you are aware of harmful behavior in humans, the more you are awake to the injustices around you, the more that you see of the brokenness that so many people try to pretend is normal, the less you'll be able to fit in. And that's not a bad thing. You don't want to fit in with the normalization of things like white supremacy or xenophobia. I know, you haven't had to think about this, but please do think about it. In this country, you know, one race is often treated as default and everyone else is seen as other. Those attitudes are wrong. You know that too. And it used to feel like the adults around you also felt that way. If you actually want to understand, listen to accounts of the world in which marginalized people actually get to tell their own stories. Dig deep. Learn the uncomfortable truths, feel the uncomfortable feelings, because yes, sometimes understanding is uncomfortable, but discomfort is often necessary for growth. Okay, so what about being able? Isn't there power in faking it until you make it? Well, right now, you're assuming that your ability level, whatever that is, will steadily increase until very late adulthood, at which time maybe the level will go down some, but you die soon after, and hopefully that's a long time away, so best not to think about that until later. But the reality is that in the long term, having to manage the impacts of chronic anxiety, depression, trauma, yes, even you have trauma, don't worry, we'll get there. Managing those things over years becomes a full-time job on top of whatever full-time job you also manage to find. In my case, I started experiencing massive panic events in my mid-30s with what felt like very little warning. Thinking was the one thing I thought I could count on to get me out of any problem, and that only made it worse. And then once the meltdown took over, I was trapped. Constant heart racing, skin buzzing, face and limbs sweating and shaking into pudding, my body ridding itself of most of its fluids for 18 hours straight. When the acute symptoms finally subsided, I'd be left in a puddle of uselessness, and it would take another 24 hours to physically recover. That means, in practical terms, that these events leave me entirely, completely unable for at least 2 whole days. And the first day I'm back, I'm at like half capacity at best. For a while, when I didn't know what was happening and why, I became afraid of getting trapped in these events because I was afraid of becoming useless, so I was reluctant to do anything that might trigger a problem. I was nervous to be away from home, I was worried about traveling anywhere, I was scared that I wouldn't have the resources I needed to discreetly take care of myself. Yes, my anxiety about my anxiety made my anxiety worse. Over time, I learned that these acute events happened when I let thoughts and experiences build up to the point of meltdown in my body by not managing the anxiety, by misunderstanding my body's signals, by pushing myself too hard, by ignoring and not processing my own lived experiences, because that's the only way I learned to get by. It took years for me to learn what my body was telling me, to become acquainted with the symptoms and signs, to take note of the triggers that could lead to an anxiety trap. It takes less time and effort now to take care of myself than it did before to manage the aftermath of not taking care of myself. But it only takes less time because I worked hard for years to unlearn the faulty assumptions about myself and the world around me. So in summary, you won't always understand and you won't always be able, but even when you do get it and you can do it, you still might not fit in.
If we're talking about statistics, you're probably in the majority or at least a sizable plurality in lots of categories. You're white, you were raised Christian, you're literate, etc. But there is one way you're probably not like the other people around you. It's time for Caveat Corner. Noodlehead, I'm just gonna come out and say it. You're asexual. Surprise! Asexuality is a vast spectrum, but for you specifically, being asexual means that you don't experience sexual attraction, like, at all. You're not going to get the hots for some handsome guy, you're not going to swoon for some sexy lady, you're not going to be inexplicably attracted to some shapely, incorporeal being made of pure energy. You'll squish, but you won't really crush. You just won't really experience physical desire. I mention this now in the episode about normal because only about 1% of the population is asexual or ace. That means in many situations you will be in the minority, if not the only one, who experiences life this way. It's incredibly confusing to live under the assumption that experiencing physical attraction is a mandatory marker of physiological development, as if sex drive is always normal. Just to be clear, it's not normal for everyone. All bodies are neat in their own ways, but I don't feel an urge to have sex with any of them. And I don't feel like I'm missing out on something in life by not experiencing physical desire and sexual attraction. Being ace in a culture that is often very focused on sex does make you a bit of an outlier since, only about 1 out of 100 people are ace. So remember that, and don't feel so bad for not fitting into normal as you're trying to figure out what normal is.
Remember, it's okay not to fit in. After all, many of the pressures you're facing to fit in come from unhealthy assumptions about the world. You're being taught to see the world in ways that set you up for shame. So, let's talk about some of those lessons about how the world works. Part 2, assumptions about the world. Noodlehead, you sure have learned some really unhelpful things in your life, and it's not your fault. You come by it honestly. A capitalistic paradigm taught you that your worth is tied to how much you can produce. Misogynistic and fatphobic paradigms taught you to be ashamed of your body. But I want to talk specifically about the pathology paradigm. This way of seeing the world teaches people to treat differences like diseases. The problem with this, as you and I both know, is that brains aren't inherently unhealthy just because they're different. And by the way, any brains that are experiencing adverse health in some way aren't bad. They deserve care and respect instead of pity and scorn. The pathology paradigm, as Dr. Nick Walker frames it, assumes 1, that there is a really narrow range of what our society deems right, normal, and healthy ways that brains should be wired and operate. That leads to the other assumption of the pathology paradigm: any brain that diverges from right or normal or healthy is bad. Think about what treating something like a disease means. If a person has a medical condition, we might say they suffer from hemorrhoids. But it's different when a person is part of a marginalized group, because identities aren't diseases. And here's where I want to talk about the DSM-4 again. 302.85, adults with gender identity disorder, are uncomfortable being regarded by others as or functioning in society as a member of their designated sex. Okay, that language is a bit prescriptive and binary, but I think that line technically fits me. I identify as non-binary to the point that I use they, them pronouns. For sexually mature individuals, men attracted to neither gender are often isolated individuals with schizoid traits. What the Okay, and what about people designated female? Virtually all females with gender identity disorder will receive the same specifier, sexually attracted to females, although there are exceptional cases involving females who are sexually attracted to males.
What about me? I was designated female, but I'm sexually attracted to neither gender, to none gender. Do I have schizoid traits too, or is that just for the designated males?
Anyway, the world isn't as black and white and diagnosable as the DSM would lead us all to believe. Yes, books like that can be useful tools that help professionals to articulate complex mental health concepts, but they can also be bludgeons that allow people in power to pathologize unfamiliar experiences. People hold on to ideas about what they think the world should be, whether that's neurotypical or straight or white or any other supposed norm, and it holds back people who don't fit those paradigms.
Ugh, don't we know it?
But here's the thing. A paradigm is simply a set of assumptions about how the world works. It doesn't have to be harmful or limiting, and as for me, I'd rather assume good things about how the world can work. So how can we think differently? Let's look at one alternative, neurodiversity. In the last video, I used the word neurotypical, and I mean who you really are past what neurotypical society bullies you into trying to be. So what does that word mean? Well, allow me to explain. Neurotypical is brain typical, which also means brains as expected, or this brain functions the way society considers typical. See how the word typical is roughly the same color and font type as the word neuro? The expected values didn't change much. Neurotypical is what society inherently expects brains to be. But what about the other brains? Neurodivergent. Certain people have brains that diverge from what society expects. You, for example. And there are lots of ways that a brain can diverge. See how the word divergent can be any one of endless colors or fonts? Neurodivergent just means a brain that diverges. It's a very broad term that covers a lot of diagnosable differences: autism, ADHD, dyslexia, epilepsy, OCD, PTSD, just to name literally only 6, which also means that neurodivergent is not a synonym for autism. But it also includes countless other things that a formal diagnosis doesn't cover. It's complex because brains are complex, and it's also unabashedly inclusive. Brains that need support should get the support they need. All brains are good brains just the way they are. And the fact that there are so many different types of brains leads me directly to talking about neurodiversity. Okay, so what is neurodiversity? It's just brain diversity, which means an array of brain types. See how the word diversity, which represents different brains, is an array of colors and fonts? Notice that society's expected typical colors and fonts are there too. Neurodiversity includes everyone. Our world, which includes neurotypical and neurodivergent brains, is neurodiverse. According to Dr. Walker, the neurodiversity paradigm has 3 assumptions. First, that neurodiversity, the diversity among minds, is a natural, healthy, and valuable form of diversity. Second, there is no normal or right style of human mind any more than there is one normal or right ethnicity, gender, or culture. And 3, the social dynamics that manifest in regard to neurological diversity are similar to those that manifest in regard to other forms of human diversity, like diversity of race, culture, gender, sexual orientation, etc. As a paradigm, neurodiversity is better for everyone because it lets us all be ourselves. Ideally, we as human beings would all be learning from one another and allowing others' lived experiences to broaden our own understanding of what it means to be alive. And I think it makes sense to strive for a better future like that. Because you've seen the way it really works. The world is a really scary and mean place that treats people outside the norm pretty badly. So I know, it's scary to commit wholeheartedly to this better world because it means having to admit that you're different. And that's hard because it also means admitting that your life is inherently going to be harder than you want it to be. But your predicament won't get any easier by ignoring it. In fact, I think it's only going to get easier if you take the time to understand what's going on and why. And it turns out 1994's The Bell Curve serves as a great encapsulation of what's going on and why.
Part 3. Assuming the worst.
Remember, as we're talking about this book, that the whole problem with the pathology paradigm is that it treats difference like diseases. It says there is a normal, and if you're not that, you're different, which is deficient. And it turns out that normal was so important to the authors of the bell curve that they manipulated some of their data to get it to conform to normal distribution, aka a bell curve. So while this book's many charts and footnotes might lead you to think it's a serious, good faith attempt to gather all available data to come to some best informed decision, it is instead a book that gathers faulty data from some questionable sources so the authors can advocate for some mostly regressive, even racist, and sometimes eugenic social policies. This video thoroughly explains the science, pseudoscience, and the developing culture that paved the way for a book like The Bell Curve, as well as the backlash and the impact.
The idea that we can use intelligence test results in order to inform political policy was only half a lifetime before the book was written, getting people sent to gas chambers. So it's not surprising that people would be rather suspicious about it. Let's just say that anyone attempting to resurrect this idea needs to be incredibly aware of and respectful of exactly where what they're proposing can lead. And all this brings us to The Bell Curve. The Empire Strikes Back. And in this book, Herrnstein and Murray come to the defense of IQ and say, now, everyone calm down. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Intelligence testing and IQ are important and useful concepts, and crucially, what we can learn from IQ testing should inform our politics and be used to change our society. So, eugenics, but nice this time.
I wish I could show it to you in its entirety because it articulates a lot of important concepts. One of the most important being that there is no objective way to put a number to someone's intelligence. No, not even IQ. Sorry to burst your bubble. Like Sean adeptly covers in his video, how well anyone does on any given test depends on who's writing the test and their comprehension of the words and the ideas put into the language of the test itself. Your high IQ at a young age resulted from high levels of pattern recognition and opportunities to develop natural propensities in language. You learned how to take tests and solve puzzles and interpret meaning, but also what part of the score you got is due to the fact that you ate breakfast that morning and got to take the test in a relatively low-stakes environment. If not getting those things had resulted in a lower score, would your actual IQ be lower? Who gets to decide how smart someone is? There's a lot of power in that. For many reasons, the idea of intelligence as a measurable attribute is just ridiculous. Getting support and assistance of any kind was always stigmatized, which is why you've always been so afraid to be seen as special needs in any way. But the sooner you realize that you do have some special needs, and that's okay, the better off you'll be. You might not always get the support you need, but you're not bad for needing support. At various times in my life, I have experienced reduced brain speed, and if I had taken an IQ test during those periods of my life, I probably would have scored lower than before. I still had the same knowledge and intelligence, hopefully more of those things in my 30s than when I was a child, but the plethora of challenges I was facing reduced my brain's ability to process data efficiently. The bell curve is fundamentally flawed because it comes to the discussion with the assumption that not only can intelligence be measured and quantified, but it should be.
So, eugenics, but nice this time.
Unfortunately, eugenics but nice this time is not an exaggeration. This is some Nazi shit. I mention all this because the time has finally come. Part 4. Okay, now we finally have to talk about autism. As a teenager, the running family joke was that I had Asperger's. Let me explain the joke. See, the kinds of mindset that believe that differences are diseases, the pathology paradigm, usually believe that autism is bad. This kind of mindset ignores the fact that autism is a vast spectrum of neurotypes because its primary concern is conformity. The more a person conforms to a norm, the more convenient they are, and that's especially important in structures and systems that prioritize productivity over well-being, like capitalism. Anyway, the joke is that autistic people are usually such a chore to deal with because of all those cringy support needs and behavioral differences. But if you can get an asterisk next to that diagnosis, you can still conditionally fit in. It's like saying you're diagnosably weird, but you're not going to be that big of a burden. My parents did not have me diagnosed as a child, largely because of the pathologizing paradigm they witnessed. They could see what the world was saying about autism. Don't worry, disgraced former Dr. Andrew Wakefield, we will get to you. And they made the judgment call that in this world that treats autistic people so badly, I was better off receiving no intervention at all, well, except for all those gifted and talented classes. The sad thing is, I don't think they were wrong, and that's really sad because I could have used a lot of help as a kid in understanding the world. If I'd been subjected to the whims of the system and if doctors in the 1990s had tried to put a label on me, I probably would have been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. In the end, I'm glad I wasn't, because here's the thing, Asperger was a Nazi. The whole idea of Asperger's syndrome was predicated on the idea that some autistic people can still be useful. Gross. Basically, this person looks and acts autistic, but, and here's where the asterisk comes in, they won't be the kind of inconvenient autistic you have to worry about. This is important because society doesn't treat autism kindly. Let's look at how the DSM-4 talks about autism. 299.00 Autistic Disorder. The essential features of autistic disorder are the presence of markedly abnormal or impaired development in social interaction and communication and a markedly restricted repertoire of activity and interests. Manifestations of the disorder vary greatly, depending on the developmental level and chronological age of the individual. Often an individual's awareness of others is markedly impaired. Individuals with this disorder may be oblivious to other children, including siblings, may have no concept of the needs of others, or may not notice another person's distress. Okay, that's enough of that. Impairments, obliviousness, lacking understanding, disorder, etc., etc., etc. The way this book talks about autism is quite insulting. It oversimplifies a vast range of experiences into a bunch of prescriptive sentences. For example, while some autistic people truly may have no concept of the needs of others, that may be how their brains naturally work, and that's fine, other autistic people may be so aware of these sometimes competing needs of others that it can become overwhelming to think about all at once. Individuals with autistic disorder may have a range of behavioral symptoms, including hyperactivity, short attention span, impulsivity, aggressiveness, self-injurious behaviors, and, particularly in young children, temper tantrums. Wow, when you put it that way, that sounds inconvenient. And you know, if autism were just a disease that could be cured, that would mean those symptoms could just be fixed. But the thing is, those symptoms of bad behavior can usually be traced back to unmet support needs. Unfortunately, society's need to easily quantify human lives can sometimes lead to neurodivergent people being labeled high functioning or low functioning. This refers to an individual's ability to continue functioning in the world despite the fact that they're not getting all their needs supported. Can you compensate for your weird behaviors and put your overstimulation in the back of your mind while you put on a normal face and act like a normal person? Congratulations, you may be high functioning. You'll be tolerated on the condition that you continue to behave normally. But if you can't hide the things that make you different, and if those differences lead to enough dysfunction, you might be labeled as low functioning. Now, when you put it that way, that sounds insulting. Autism is a term that covers a very broad collection of attributes, but a lot of people don't accept that. In my timeline, even our new head of the Department of Health and Human Services talks about autism like a disease, like something that needs to be eradicated. This guy's even leery of vaccines because he thinks some of them cause autism. Wait, why would he think that? Andrew? In 1997, Andrew Wakefield put out a now retracted paper that linked autism to the MMR vaccine. He exploited the gap in knowledge and basic understanding that people had and still have about autism in order to scare people. The study was bad. Not only was it flawed, it also contained falsified data. Parents who were interviewed later saw the data Wakefield submitted about their child and were like, that's not what I told him. Wow, and why was he deliberately trying to establish a link? Because he was getting paid to discredit the MMR vaccine, and he wanted to sell his own alternate vaccination. British journalist Brian Deere blew the lid off this story with his investigation several years ago, so go read his book. Or you can do what I did and watch H. Bomber Guy's video about the whole thing, and then go read Brian Deere's work. It's incredible. The story is amazing. Anyway, despite the fact that Wakefield was never an expert in vaccines or brains, his medical specialty was gastroenterology. The media took his bullshit study and ran with it because fear equals ratings. That's how a grifter who lost his medical license, along with the media edutainment industry, convinced a lot of people that being autistic is a worse fate than contracting life-threatening diseases. People like Andrew Wakefield, and now lots of people who bought into his lies, like our new head of DHHS, all see autism as a disease to similarly treat and ultimately prevent. That's a problem wherever you are on the spectrum. Putting an asterisk next to an autism diagnosis feels kind of like saying, don't worry, you're not one of those autistics. I'm not saying that everyone who uses that label condones all of the implications, because the average person didn't have access to the wealth of information that we have now, and certainly some people may have learned to value their status of weird but not a burden, like their lives depended on it. Identities are tricky things, so I don't want to police other people's usage of Asperger's. But I'll put it this way, ignorant people tend to identify Asperger's as an acceptable kind of autism, and I'm not spending all this time and energy trying to get ignorant people to accept me. These days, Asperger diagnoses are much less common because, again, Asperger was a Nazi and it used to feel like we all agreed that this was bad. In our discussion at the beginning of the video, I mentioned a very rich man who made a troubling gesture with his arm. Despite the fact that this man publicly agreed with white supremacist ideology ahead of time, and despite the fact that he unmistakably made the gesture twice, some people still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt because of his Asperger's. You see, because this man has self-identified as having Asperger's syndrome, a dismaying chorus of people tried to say, hey, he probably didn't know any better. Just so you know, they're saying this about the supposedly genius man in charge of multiple tech companies and at the helm of one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, a platform he posts on frequently. Assuming that he doesn't know any better because of his different brain is really insulting, incredibly insulting to other autistic people. And he made this gesture at the second inauguration of the man who took all the subtlety out of Reagan's Make America Great Again slogan. He knew enough of the implications around what he was doing to know it was wrong, but he did it anyway, and the fact that he faces largely no consequences for these kinds of actions is honestly pretty scary, because we grew up in a time when it felt like most people agreed that Nazi stuff is bad. People shouldn't be ranked or privileged or excluded, and this shouldn't be controversial to say. That kind of exclusion goes against the moral codes that adults around you taught you to understand as normal, like treat people the way you want to be treated and love your neighbor as yourself. A few weeks ago, I had an appointment for medication management. You see, after decades of being on an SSRI to treat depression and anxiety, I now understand that those are symptoms pointing to a larger problem, the conundrum of being neurodivergent in a system that wasn't built for me. With the knowledge and understanding that I now have about my own brain, I was hoping to be able to discuss medication and treatment options in a better informed way. But as soon as I mentioned autism, it felt like this health provider didn't know what to do with me. Socially, I mean. On the one hand, as a clinician with experience dealing with autistic patients, mostly children, I later came to find out, it felt like he had a whole lot of experience he could offer me. The problem was that this experience seemed to be informed by a very pathologizing view of autism. It felt as though he was coming to my situation, the one I've spent decades uncovering, as if he had nothing to learn from me. I tried to bring up RSD, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which is a fairly common experience among late-diagnosed autistic folks, and it's a condition I'm actively working to manage. But when I brought it up, he dismissively replied, "What's that?" And when I tried to explain that RSD is commonly associated with the CPTSD that surrounds the neurodivergent experience, he grilled me on whether or not my experience actually counted as PTSD, like he hadn't heard of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and just assumed that I was casually throwing around a concept like trauma. And yeah, before I heard the term CPTSD, I spent years calling what I experienced milquetoast trauma in order to differentiate it from things like over-abuse and intentional physical neglect. Yes, I know I could have had it worse as a child, and that doesn't change the fact that I also could have had a hell of a lot more support as a child. And having a clinician question my lived experience didn't help me receive better care. In fact, it made me more leery of the system. Unfortunately, the pathologizing paradigm tells autistic people and neurodivergent people at large, don't be too much of a burden and we'll let you fit in. But if you say no thanks to that conditional acceptance, you risk being oppressed and ostracized. Now in this case, I was able to talk to the office manager and switch to a different provider in the same practice who has less pathologizing views on autism. Actually, less pathologizing is an understatement. The second provider said, and I quote, "You are the expert in your own brain," and it was like the clouds parted. It shouldn't feel like such a revelation to talk to a provider who doesn't pathologize my brain function. Unfortunately, a lot of people, even people who should know better, like medical professionals or the head of the freaking DHHS, think that brains need to be normal in order to be acceptable. What is it about brain divergence that's so scary to the status quo? Don't worry, we'll get there. Just remember, you shine brightest when you're not trying to be normal. I'll see you next time.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I'm definitely gonna be tired tomorrow morning.
Yeah, me too. But I think it's worth it.
You know what? Me too.
And now that you know that there's not just one normal way to be, you don't have to feel bad for not fitting in.
Hooray!
Yeah, remember, you're not inherently better than anyone, and they're not inherently better than you.
So I can just be myself?
That's right, you got it.
Well, who is that? Who am I?